Well, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. As Hungary marks the anniversary of the 1956 revolution, citizens are gathering across Budapest to commemorate the uprising against Soviet rule, a historic moment that continues to resonate across the rising political class. Now, today we speak with Andreas Umland, an analyst at the Stockholm Centre for Eastern European Studies, examine how history, nationalism, and the upcoming 2026 elections are shaping the country's political future. Good to have you back on. Thanks so much for being here, Andreas.
Thanks for having me again, Sasha.
So I want to talk about the symbolism here. I mean, this is a powerful moment for Hungary, for democracy, for standing up against Soviet repression. But both if we look at Orban himself and his main political opponent, Mr. Magyar, they're both using this symbol in a different way. Why does this matter so much to the Hungarian political psyche?
I think it has a lot to do with Hungarian history, and not just of the 20th century, but one could argue also of the 19th century and perhaps even earlier, because Hungary has its own history of resisting Russian intrusion, Russian imperialism, and the issue of Ukraine has now appeared as oddly a domestic issue in Hungary. And this war of liberation that Ukraine is currently fighting, one would think is something that Hungarians should feel very sympathetic about, because they have been themselves fighting against Tsarist imperialism, Soviet imperialism, and they have suffered themselves a lot from Moscow's rule. But nevertheless, Ukraine is now used, this fight by Ukraine for independence is now used by Orban as an issue to actually mobilize his voters against the European Union, against Ukraine, against the European project. So I guess this will be a major topic in these elections.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you said this matters very much for Hungarian history as well. You mentioned the European Union. We also have the European Council meeting today, so all the European Union leaders gathering there. But at the same time, I think it was just a year ago, when Orban basically likened and compared resisting the Soviets in 1956 to resisting Brussels now. I mean, does that really come across as sensible to most Hungarians? I mean, how does this rhetoric help or let's say divide in Hungary?
Well, the big difference between 1956 and today is, of course, that Hungary can leave the European Union anytime it wants, whereas the Hungary of 1956, the People's Republic of Hungary, could not leave the Soviet bloc. And when it wanted to leave, then the Soviet government sent tanks to keep it. And of course, the Soviet bloc is also was by its nature very different from the European Union. So this is all, I would say, for everybody in Hungary who knows a little bit about Hungarian history, that should all sound rather odd. There's also another connection here between the current events and what happened in 1956, namely that a man called Yuri Andropov was the Soviet ambassador to Budapest in 1956. He was then a diplomat, but later on he became the head of the KGB, and shortly before his death, he became the general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and is largely known in this capacity as being one of the last Soviet rulers. But as head of KGB, he is known to be the example, the model figure for Vladimir Putin, who is sort of very appreciative of Yuri Andropov, who sees Andropov as his model. And no other than Andropov led as Soviet ambassador in Budapest in 1956 the suppression of the people's insurrection back then against Soviet rule and de facto Moscow's imperial ambitions at that time.
Right. I mean, this obviously matters very much to Hungarians. This is a key moment in their history. It's something that both political sides are trying to play to. As I said, Magyar is having his followers at various rallies, and Orban is trying to do the same. This is now, tying it back to Brussels, this is delaying Orban from actually attending that summit of leaders in Brussels. I mean, what does that say about this? I mean, should he be there? I mean, what does it signal that he's not there, that he'll be delayed, rather? I find this all kind of interesting that he chooses to stay at home for this, and as we said, to commemorate those kind of losses against the kind of regime that he's close to right now. So tell us about his, let's say, delay of being in Brussels today.
It reminds me of another story about the candidacy process of the European Union, when basically Orban was asked by then German Chancellor Scholz to leave the room when the European Council was making a decision to forward the candidacy of Ukraine for entering the European Union. So there are now different occasions or different paths that Brussels is finding and Orban are finding not to communicate on Ukraine, and to sort of leave him out of the game and simply to take decisions then without Orban actually being present. So this is now an odd situation, and this entire attention for Hungary that we currently have has a lot of course to do with the fact that both the European Union and NATO are in when it comes to their most fundamental decisions, have the consensus principle. Every member country of NATO and the European Union has therefore a veto right. And that's why suddenly a small country, relatively small country as Hungary, has become a major factor in the foreign relations of both NATO and the European Union, where Hungary has been now for at least a decade sabotaging cooperation between Ukraine and NATO and between Ukraine and the European Union.
Right. But at the same time, I mean, there's good news. I mean, that 19th package of sanctions that did pass, Slovakia removed its final objections there. So there is slow movement. I do want to ask you one more question as well. If we're looking at the polls right now, various independent polls in Hungary, you have those elections coming up in the spring next year. It looks like Magyar, the opposition leader, very much in the lead. Do you think with the momentum right now, can that hold with events like today? Will that help him? Can he maintain that lead?
I hope so, and I fear also that if the lead remains, that Orban may then try to falsify the elections. That would be no surprise to me in view of his previous behavior, both domestically and also in foreign affairs. Orban has good relations with China, with Russia, with authoritarian countries, and so the fear here is that he will resort to authoritarian methods if the elections do not go his way. And we may be in for a hot spring in Hungary if there is indeed such a kind of domestic escalation.
Right. I mean, it's one of those great political mysteries, right? That liberal student, Viktor Orban, who turned into a very illiberal leader. And I think we're going to assess that, analyze it more as we move closer to that election. Look, today is an important day for Hungarians and for Europe, 1956 revolution. We'll close it there. Thank you so much, Andreas Umland there. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but there's much more coming up right here on TVP World, so don't go away.